This week on the show, we look at benchmarks from DragonFlyBSD versus FreeBSD versus Linux on a Ryzen 7. The JFK Presidential Library has chosen TrueNAS for the digital archives they have. FreeBSD 12.1 beta is available for people to test. We have a listing of cool but obscure X11 tools for you, a vBSDcon trip report, updates from Project Trident, and a couple of new Unix artifacts hinted in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 318, the TrueNAS Library, recorded for the 2nd of October 2019. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Kreuzling.
And I'm Helen Jude.
Yeah, as always, and we have a very nice show prepared for you today. Starting with headlines, a little bit from the performance benchmarking area. We have an article about DragonFlyBSD 5.6 versus FreeBSD 12 versus Linux on the Ryzen 7 3700X.
Yep, so the 3700X versus, I guess the other one was... Ubuntu 1904 and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed.
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm.
So this machine is at... It doesn't say how many gigahertz, handily. Anyway, looking at the tests to begin with, in the Go benchmark, numbers vary quite a lot.
Oh, strongly, yeah.
And that doesn't seem to make very much sense.
Yeah, so less is better here in these graphs. So
showing, FreeBSD being much worse at this particular Go benchmark, but doesn't really explain why. I'm sure there's some reasonable explanation, and that FreeBSD should be doing much better than that.
Oh, yes, for sure. Someone should look into that.
Yeah, so then when you look at the vanilla Go JSON benchmark, you see much more reasonable numbers where FreeBSD is right in the grouping with the two different Linux releases. And you see FreeBSD 12 with Clang is slightly faster than with GCC 9.
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm. That makes it a bit look more better in this regard, or at least in this benchmark. Benchmarks always look in certain areas that other benchmarks might not look, so there's different numbers and data, and at least it gives you an overview.
Although with some of these, if you're just benchmarking Go, and it's not depending on any other thing, you would expect all the results to be the same, and seeing wildly different numbers suggests there's more going on there than it seems, and one would want to know more.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with the Go build benchmark, but for some reason they ran the Dragonfly one 15 times, and it has looks like a very large standard error.
Is there some caching involved here in the building, or?
I don't think it's that. It's just, I'm guessing they ran extra runs of the test because they were seeing very large variance in the numbers. And so that probably warrants further investigation. But looking at their Java test, this is more like what you would expect, with all of them within a very tight range. Although Dragonfly seems to be a little slower there, and I'm guessing there's some reasonable explanation for that. I'm guessing the answer is not the Dragonfly is in fact slower. And so, again, all benchmarks need to be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Looking at using John the Ripper's Blowfish benchmark, we see that the fastest was in fact FreeBSD 12, beating out even Ubuntu 1904 by 0.5% or so. And then Dragonfly and FreeBSD 12 with GCC 9 and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed all have almost exactly the same number. If you were to compare these, I'm guessing your answer would be that what you were actually benchmarking here was not Dragonfly versus FreeBSD versus OpenSUSE, but GCC 9 versus Clang.
And again, we have a Dragonfly 15 runs versus 3 on the others. So not sure what's happening there.
But the numbers coming up very tight there between Dragonfly and FreeBSD with GCC 9 and then Linux very much suggests that maybe all three of those are using the same version of GCC, whereas the other two that have a wildly different number are using two different Clang.
Yep.
Or maybe just Ubuntu. I don't know. I don't think Ubuntu uses Clang, but maybe. Or it's just a different version of GCC that happens to perform differently at that. Then looking at the H.265 benchmark, again, you would expect to see demonstrably similar results between these. And again, in this one, FreeBSD comes out slightly ahead with Clang, doing slightly better than the GCC version. And in that case, FreeBSD doing better in all of those benchmarks.
Yep.
Then looking at Rust, being a nice low-level language or whatever, time to complete a serial/parallel Mandelbrot. Again, all of the tests coming out with almost exactly the same number because you're benchmarking just the processor, and you would expect. And basically, if you saw one of these having a wildly different number, you would know that you were benchmarking something other than what you thought you were benchmarking. You weren't actually benchmarking Rust. You were benchmarking something else that was introducing this difference somewhere.
Sure. Yep.
So looking at PG Bench, transactions per second, FreeBSD doing much worse in this particular benchmark. Hard to say whether that's... they say, even in the comments here, they're noting that they were basically benchmarking ZFS versus other file systems, and it turns out the extra guarantees and so on that ZFS adds do come at a cost, and that, especially without the proper tuning, you can really nerf your results. I'm guessing with this being Postgres, I guess it's a read-only benchmark, so the write stuff isn't as bad. Actually, in a read-only benchmark, ZFS shouldn't really be any slower. So now I'm more interested in what the difference there might have been. But if you don't configure ZFS with the right record size and so on, something for a Postgres, you can get much, much worse results.
Yeah.
Looking at the read-write test, Tumbleweed, the OpenSUSE was way down there with its XFS and Butterfs setup, whereas FreeBSD was nice and solid, but Dragonfly was faster, and the Ubuntu with ext4 being the strongest. But again, you can see there are different compile options and some other differences in there as well. That
might help there, yeah.
And again, some ZFS tuning for Postgres might have made a big difference there. So you weren't necessarily benchmarking the OS. For this test, it might make more sense to actually be using a memory-backed file system so that you don't end up, rather than benchmarking FreeBSD with Postgres, you're benchmarking ZFS versus Hammer versus so on. And with there being so many variances there, it's very hard to get repeatable results. Whereas maybe with a memory-backed file system, you would eliminate some of that variance.
Sure, yeah.
And then lastly, they're just geometric mean of all test results is not really a meaningful number.
Yeah. Doesn't help you decide which is the better one.
But it gives you a basic rundown of what it looks like. And that FreeBSD and Dragonfly, considering their much, much, much smaller number of developers, especially developers focused on AMD, we're doing a very good job of keeping up with Linux.
That's still a nice way of looking at some numbers and making sure they work, but you should definitely take this with a grain of salt and look into more details, how they were performed and what the numbers tell you or don't tell you. Okay, next up we have a story from the IX Systems blog that John F. Kennedy Presidential Library has chosen IX Systems TrueNAS to preserve the precious digital archives. So that's interesting news from the industry, basically, and in a different use case that you normally don't get. So they write that IX Systems is honored to have the TrueNAS M series unified storage selected to store, serve, and protect the entire digital archive of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. This is in support of the collection at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, the JFK Library for short. Over the next several years, the Foundation hopes to grow the digital collection from hundreds of terabytes today to cover more of the archives at the Kennedy Library. Overall, there is a total of 25 million documents, audio recordings, photos, and videos once the project is complete. Having first deployed the TrueNAS M50-HHA, that's probably high availability, early in 2019, the JFK Library has now completed the migration of its existing digital collection and is now in the process of digitizing much of the rest of its vast collection. Not only is the catalog of material vast, it is also diverse, with files being copied to the storage system from a variety of sources in numerous file types. To achieve this ambitious goal, the library required a high-end NAS system capable of sharing with a variety of systems throughout the digitization process. The digital library or the archive will be served from the TrueNAS M50 and made available to both in-person and online visitors. So whenever you click on some info panel, I guess, you will be served by FreeNAS. And I guess ZFS in the background. I'm fairly sure of that. With precious material and information comes robust demands. The highly available TrueNAS M series has multiple layers of protection to help keep data safe, including data scrubs, checksums, unlimited snapshots, replication, and more. TrueNAS is also inherently scalable, with data shares only limited by the number of drives connected to the pool. Perfect for archival storage, the deployed TrueNAS M50 will grow with the library's content, easily expanding its storage capacity over time as needed. Supporting a variety of protocols, multi-petabyte scalability in a single share, and anytime uninterrupted capacity expansion, the TrueNAS M series ticked all the right boxes. Yeah, that's great. So that is specifically the use case for ZFS and long-time archival storage that is read mostly, because no one is going to change these files anymore, but people in future generations still want to be able to access them, and ZFS is able to not only make sure that the current data is safe, but also the data on the archive tapes, basically.
Being able to do a ZFS scrub to make sure that all the data you have is not bit routing is really important when you're going to store this data for 100 years or more.
And you remember the examples that IX Systems always had on their website where there's just a single bit changing in an image file that would completely screw up the image.
Don't want that happen to the only copy of some important images.
Yeah.
Luckily, the advantage of digitization is that we can have many copies of these. But being able to verify that the original copies do not become corrupted is very important.
Yeah, so that's definitely a good use case for this kind of thing. So next time we visit that library, we might as well look out. Maybe we'll see somewhere in a corner of a screen somewhere that there's a Served by TrueNAS sign or something. Time for the news roundup this week. We have the FreeBSD 12.1 beta available already, so that's very early in the process of development, but they are given to people to test it early and find bugs.
Well, it's not early in the development because basically all the features that are going to be in 12.1 are there. But yes, now's the time to test and find problems, get them fixed before we cut the final release in about a month.
Yeah, it's happening quickly, and the more errors we find, if any, the better for the final release of 12.1.
Yeah, because it's been about a year since 12.0, so it'll be really good to get this update out there. And it has many security and bug fixes. And one other change is that on all the architectures that still use GCC 4.2, we've disabled the warnings as errors compiler flag because GCC 4.2 is so old that it complains about a bunch of actually perfectly valid code. And rather than constantly making little changes to unconfuse GCC 4.2, we will just stop making those changes be breaking changes or breaking errors. But other big change is the import of bare SSL into the base system to provide a lightweight TLS implementation for the new verified bootloader that Juniper is working on.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember those discussions, which kind of SSL library we're going to get.
Yeah, there's also incorporates all the security advisors that have come out since 12.0 and all the errata notices and other fixes since then.
Yes, yeah. So everything that's happening on head and is stable enough will be ported back through a process called MFC, and that is then available in the 12.1 release eventually. So yeah, help test if you have some time and report any issues that you find or any drivers not working anymore, but definitely give us some feedback about this. All right, our next item here is called Cool but Obscure X11 Tools. More suggestions in the source link here on our show notes, of course. And This is a small collection of tools for the X Windows system. For cool terminal tools, see Christoph Kovac's cool but obscure Unix tools. That's also linked from the article. All applications have been tested on FreeBSD, but should run on other Unix-like operating systems as well. This page is still work in progress. So there's a whole bunch of programs and, of course, screenshots of each of them that you can find on LX11.
Yeah, like AS Clock, which provides a little clock and calendar. Free42 is a very nice scientific calculator.
Oh, yes, the HP42S scientific calculator.
FSV2 is a 3D file system visualizer, like the FSN that was in SGI IRIX. Basically visualizes where your space is going. So you'll see the files that are taking up most of your space will appear as big blocks, and the tiny files will be tiny, and so on. Micropolis, which is a open source version of SimCity. The sun clock, which is super useful, basically shows a world map and shows where the sun is right now. So you can easily tell, might the people I want to talk to in Europe be awake right now? Or would it be too late and it would be, rude to ping them right now?
Yeah, some of them are useful. Some of them are more historical, like the ones for the punch cards.
X026 is a key punch emulator to simulate an IBM 026, perfect for writing Fortran code on Hollerith punch cards and getting a clear picture of how laborious data input was back then. If you want to play with a punch card.
Or a little further down, if you miss Pac-Man, there's X-Chump, which is a clone of the famous arcade game Pac-Man for X. It's just another package install away.
Or X-Abacus, if you want to use an actual abacus.
Yeah, well, all these calculators and computers are so complicated.
X-ASCII just provides an ASCII code table. So, if you need to know that the ASCII code for uppercase L is 76, super helpful.
Or if you want to playing a round of Galaga, there's X-Galaga. Shoot 'em up. X-Invaders as well. Or what can come in handy, X-Kill, in case a window is frozen and you can't kill it anymore. There's X-Kill, which gives you a kill cursor, and then just snap that window and it will disappear.
Here you go. X-Lennart is a modification on the old arcade game X-Bill. An evil and unpopular computer hacker named Lennart tries to install his malicious init system on various BSD and Linux systems. Like in the X-Bill program, the player has to hit him and restore the infected systems.
Wow, that hits, yeah. Or once the holiday season has started, there's X-Snow. Let it snow on your desktop.
Or X-Mahjong. Ooh, X-Man, if you want to have your man pages in X instead of in your terminal. Not sure why you would care, but...
Oh yeah, speaking of terminals, there's also X-Term, of course.
Yeah, well, I'm sure most people have seen that one before. X-Post-it lets you just stick Post-it notes on your screen. I could use that some days.
With no passwords on them, of course. Yeah, there's good find in there.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Interesting tools. So next we have a trip report from vBSDcon.
Oh, yes.
This one's from Michael Dexter. So the fourth biennial vBSDcon was held in Reston, Virginia on September 5th through the 7th and attracted attendees and presenters from not only the Washington, D.C. area, but also Canada, Germany, Kenya, and beyond. While MeetBSD caters to the Silicon Valley BSD enthusiasts on the even years, vBSDcon caters to East Coast and DC area enthusiasts on the odd-numbered years. VeriSign was, again, the key sponsor of vBSDcon, but this year entrusted the organization to a team led by Dan Langell and...
Mark, what's his name, Felder?
Yes, Mark Felder. Thank you. And Dan, you probably know as the lead BSDCan organizer. Anyway, it worked out very well. vBSD kicked off with a hackathon on the Thursday night where people worked on projects and slides or just caught up with each other. and manage their jet lag with a combination of conversations and visit to many local food options. Then the talks kicked off with Paul Vixie's timely in-depth analysis of DNS over HTTPS and the risks that it presents, and then was followed by John Baldwin's tour of the in-kernel TLS work done by Netflix. So while both of those talks were also at EuroBSDcon, they were both quite different when presented at Euro. The TLS one at Euro was presented by Hans-Peter Selesky and Drew Gallatin, and was more focused on Mellanox and some of the other side of the work. So there's that. And then, like I mentioned in last week's episode, Paul Vixie's talk, while it was based on the same slide deck, some of the stuff was in a different order, and he covered quite a bit of different material between the two talks. So I highly recommend that you watch both versions, since there's actually not that much overlap.
Which is good. They're just 2 weeks away from each other.
Yes. And then Dave Fullard gave his talk transitioning from FreeNAS to FreeBSD, which tells an interesting story of one of the paths that we use to get new FreeBSD users is by converting people who are just using FreeNAS kind of casually and making them into more hardcore power users and getting them over into vanilla FreeBSD and letting them tinker with things and learn more. And then Brian Callahan also hosted his parallel tutorial learning to do OpenBSD through its porting system. Then after lunch, Sean Webb gave his State of the Hardened Union about Hardened BSD. And then Benedict gave his talk on how his university has replaced Oracle database with FreeBSD, ZFS, and Postgres, because that's what people are more likely to see out in industry and, to get out from under the thumb of Oracle.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And then wrapping up the day, Michael Lucas gave his 20 years in jail, FreeBSD jails then and now, to go with his newly released FreeBSD Mastery Jails book. Then Friday night, people got to hang out and do stuff. On the third day of vBSDcon, started with Colin Percival's talk, 23 Years of Software Side Channel Attacks. Highly recommend that. While it might sound like it'll be over your head, Colin did a very good job of explaining it. Well, still having the technical detail, but making it understandable to those who are not that well versed in that particular area. Then I did my talk, explain to me like I'm 5, how ZFS caching works. Then Michael Dexter did his ZFS performance results across 6 operating systems, comparing the performance of OpenZFS on TrueOS, FreeNAS, CentOS, Debian, NetBSD, OmniOS, and macOS, and Windows. Then after lunch, Connor Beh gave his talk about how they use FreeBSD at work, including network storage, infrastructure, and networking with pfSense. So basically pfSense and FreeNAS and how those enable their business. And then Kurt Moschek gave his heartfelt talk, Care and Feeding of OpenBSD Porters. And then finally, Aaron Poffenberger gave his Road Warrior Disaster Recovery, how to have secure, synchronized, and backed up laptop so that when you're on the road, bad things don't happen.
That was a good one.
And then we wrapped up with a BSDCan-inspired auction, raising money for the local Shriners Hospital.
Yep, that was also a nice gesture from the conference. All right, yeah, that was very nice as a trip report. Next up, we have a bit of an update from the project Trident. So there is their 7th update to the 12th branch, I would say, available now. And they have, of course, a full list of package updates. They have 130 new packages, 72 deleted packages, and 865 updated ones. So that's quite a list. But do they have other updates despite the number of ports and packages?
Basically updating to a newer version of 12 stable and then the packages.
Okay, yeah.
So I think a semi-automated snapshot build.
Yeah, so people can upgrade to that one. And if there's more in the future, we'll also cover that if there's some major release happening or they will have some functionality added to it. Next up, we have interesting things for the historians among us. A couple new Unix artifacts over at the TUHS, which is the Historical Unix Society.
Yes, the Unix Heritage Society.
Heritage, right. That kind of also connects a little bit to EuroBSDcon, because Warner Losh's talk also had reference to that. And
yes, that this is basically the archive where a lot of that information came from for Warner's talks. So Warren Toomey, who is one of the curators over at TUS, has posted, he says, I fear we've drifted a bit here and the signal to noise ratio is dropping a bit with regard to the actual history of Unix. So can we please have no more on the relative merits of version control systems or alternative text processing systems? So I'd like to try to distract you by saying this. I'm sitting on 2 artifacts that have been recently given to me by 2 large organizations of great significance to Unix history who want me to keep mum about them, and they are going to make announcements about them soon, for some definition of soon. And I am slowly going crazy as I wait for them to be officially released. So now you have a new topic to talk about.
Well, that's a teaser.
Indeed.
If there is an actual announcement of some sorts, we'll definitely be behind it in covering that. But for now, it's speculation.
Looking at some, a number of people saying, we wish we had more stuff from the V0 through V4 eras, but we don't know that much of that might even, we don't know how much of that even still exists. So our hopes there are not necessarily that high.
Yeah, but some of the major companies, they mentioned that they could still be sitting on some old hardware they want to get rid of.
In general, the hardware is not necessarily that interesting. However, they do note some stuff, old version of Trough, we still have some source files. Their source file names in the deleted directory entries of the V6 distribution, because the media was reused and so on. They found the names of deleted files, but not the content and so on.
Yeah, so preserving the Unix history, we covered this in our last episode a bit, is good for future generations to see, how we got here and why things they are evolved in the same way they are, or why are tools behaving a certain way. Okay, we are jumping right into the Beastie Bits now. First item we have here is NetBSD machines at Open Source Conference 2019 in Hiroshima. That's always interesting because Japan and NetBSD means interesting machines you don't normally see unless you're from that area. And I'm fairly sure there will be plenty of pictures. Yes, there are a couple of Twitter posts.
Yep, you can see the picture of the little booth here. They have an XM6i and a bunch of all kinds of special machines going on here.
Oh, yes.
And they have lots of stickers and stuff they were giving away as well.
Huh, nice.
They had an Omron Luna 68K with a NetBSD PCM audio device. They have a Twitter stream running on a Sharp X68030 using the X68K port of NetBSD 8 or 9 even. XM6i team has a donation request for an MC68060 RC75 revision 5 CPU for support of the 68060. They have a Luna 68K emulation running on NetBSD on AMD 64. It's cool. An XM8 NEC PC8801 emulator and a PC 6001 VX emulator. NetBSD running on the Pinebook with desktop and camera and everything. So some modern hardware mixed in there as well.
Yeah, it's not just historic parts.
Oh, here we go. OMX player on NetBSD eARM V7HF on a Raspberry Pi 3 with a HD Pico laser projector.
Ooh.
I missed the Raspberry Pi part of that at first and thought they somehow were running NetBSD on the projector and got really excited.
Of course it runs NetBSD. That would be awesome.
But they have a ton of different pictures there. So if you're interested in some of this old rare hardware, definitely worth checking out.
Then we have some adoption news. Hyperbola, a GNU Linux OS, is using OpenBSD's Xenokara. So they have an announcement on their website at hyperbola.info. So they write that as Xenokara follows the same goals than our own packaging guidelines and stability and security concerns, they have decided to remove x.org and use Xenokara as their default provider of display server for the X Windows system. which means that the Milky Way version 0.2 will be the last version supporting X.0. And they write about Xenokera that it provides a framework to host OpenBSD modifications and to automate the build of the module XOR components, including the third-party packages and some software maintained by OpenBSD developers. So this is not only available on OpenBSD alone anymore.
Yeah, I was wondering how much work it might be to actually get Xenokera running on another OS, especially when that other OS is Linux-based rather than a BSD, because it would be a little bit further apart. But yeah, so if you're not familiar, Xenokera is basically a customized X server that utilizes a dedicated _X11 user by default to drop privileges and perform privilege separation in accordance with OpenBSD's least privilege policy. And it includes several other projects like CWM, their stacking window manager for X.
Oh, great. That's good news.
And just quick looking at their to-do list for migrating to Xenokera.
Yeah, what's left to do and help wanted.
It looks like it's auto-generated.
So they have a bit of work to be going.
I'm not sure. It looks like most of it is marked as complete.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe other Linux distributions might follow that example. Who knows?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if there ends up being a Xenokera-portable version.
Oh, yeah. Why not? I mean, many of the Linux folks have looked closer to Wayland now, but who knows? Maybe someone are still on X11.
So next up, if you're interested in a job, Cisco Talos's security intelligence team is hiring a FreeBSD engineer. So if you receive general instructions for new responsibilities from your supervisor, can maintain, troubleshoot, deploy, and monitor networks and servers and systems. If you can recommend and plan future expansion and have at least 3 years of Unix or BSD system experience, they prefer a bachelor's degree, but not required, and the ability to troubleshoot systems and networks, then you should apply. They're looking for people with FreeBSD and VMware experience. NetApp experience is a big plus. Ability to write and debug Perl and shell scripts, and familiarity with common protocols like DNS, LDAP, DHCP, ActiveMQ, MySQL, Apache, etc. And of course, strong interpersonal and communication skills, especially because I think part of the team is remote for this work.
Mm-hmm.
But we know some other people on those the Cisco Talos teams, so you will be part of a very good team. So if you're interested, you should follow the link there and you can apply.
You never know where you end up and what kind of interesting projects you're involved. Okay, then we have something on GitHub here, a collection of pure POSIX SH or shell alternatives to external processes.
Yes, so instead of forking out to some other process, ways of doing it in pure shell, which is always much, much faster.
So examples here. So it's basically a book or like a Bible because they have so much in there. The goal of this book is to document commonly known and lesser known methods of doing various tasks using only built-in POSIX shell features. Using the snippets from this Bible can help remove unneeded dependencies from scripts and in most cases make them faster. They came across these tips and discovered a few while developing KISS Linux. Really?
It's keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
An acronym.
Yeah, and other small projects. So the snippets below there are all linted using shell check. Excellent. And if someone sees something incorrectly described, buggy or outright wrong, then they can open a pull request or an issue and get that fixed. Oh wow, this is a really big book. I guess I should take a look at that closer for my shell class.
Yeah, so they have a bunch of string ones like just strip a pattern from the end of a string. And then if you click on it, it shows you how to do that.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of good tools in there.
And they have examples like a function called split that allows you to split things based on whatever field you prefer. So you basically provide it the first variable or the first argument to your function is some string. And the second argument is how you want to split it. And you get back it split up based on those split points. So if you call split apples, comma, oranges, comma, pears, comma, grapes, and the second parameter is comma, you get back apples, oranges, pears, and grapes as separate lines.
Yeah, this is a nice library to your already existing tools collection in the shell area. I will definitely add this to my lecture slides about the shell scripting.
Yeah, because, forking out to something like cut just to split stuff up based on a comma or something is excessive. And this will be much faster to do if you can do it all without using any external programs. And as I mentioned, it makes your shell script more portable since, the cut command could be slightly different across a couple different OSs, whereas the stuff that's built into the shell will be the same. If you're only using the POSIX components of the shell, then they're by definition supposed to be exactly the same across every OS.
Yeah, this is really nice.
This is a very handy collection.
Next up, we have something here from DragonFlyBSD. Dsynth, you're building it over at the DragonFlyBSD digest. So we mentioned Dsynth in previous episodes, but here they write that the build world cycle now includes Dsynth. Your build world will take a bit longer, but now you can immediately bulk build packages if using binaries isn't right for you. So they made that part of the build world process.
Right. So if you're not familiar, dsynth is a rewrite of synth to basically provide bulk building of D ports, but written in C, whereas the original synth was written in Ada.
Yeah, that's a bit, I wouldn't say obscure, but it's not a very common language nowadays.
Right. And I think it's just this way it can be bundled into the Dragonfly-based system. So basically, it's Dragonfly's alternative to Poudriere, although it's not the same as Poudriere. It's more like port upgrade or something. But it's designed to allow you to update your system, whereas Poudriere is kind of about building packages that you use on other computers and usually not necessarily on the system you're actually doing the building on, whereas Dsynth is designed for updating the computer you're running it on.
Sure, yeah. Very cool. And last but not least, we have Percy Ludgate, the missing link between Babbage's machine and everything else.
So Percy Ludgate is the first person known to have followed in Charles Babbage's footsteps. Many years ago, I had stumbled across a reference to his work. I published an account of my attempt to find out about him and had reprinted in my book, The Origins of Digital Computers, selected papers, the one detailed published account of his analytical machine that I had found that he had written. I had done a little further investigation thereafter until I was contacted by Dr. Brian Coughlin from Trinity College almost 3 years ago. Since then, I have had been a minor contributor to the work of Brian and his team, and I'm greatly impressed with the amount of further information they have found about Luddage and his family. Brian gave a fascinating summary account of the team's research in a recent West Cork History Festival. An MP4 video of his presentation, as well as other relevant documents, can be found at this link, as well as a PDF of his PowerPoint presentation included here. The details, all the information they have found about Ludgate and his family, and less numerous outstanding queries. Needless to say, help in answering any of these queries would be very welcome.
See, you never know what missing links we find.
Yeah, it turns out that history is worth preserving, and we really didn't necessarily do a very good job of it in the past.
Could be because things are evolving quickly.
It just goes to show the importance of projects like archive.org to keep copies of all this old stuff. Because right now is about the time where all your old stuff from the 90s and the 2000s that you don't really want anymore and is taking up space in your basement you'd like to get rid of. Well, if you can digitize it or send it away and have it digitized and get it part of that Internet Archive, there will be a copy after you throw out the thing that's clogging up all the space in your basement.
Yeah, or as Indiana Jones would say, that belongs in a museum. Time for feedback and questions this week. Always interesting to fill this section with feedback and questions, so send any questions you have to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And this time, someone called Bruce did something right. So now Bruce not only has a question, but in the meantime, he also found a solution and didn't keep the solution to himself, but he sent also a follow-up with the solution here, or at least an update, so that we also can see what the solution was or how he got this running. But first, the original question. Down the expect rabbit hole, it's called. Bruce writes, "Hi, I have heard good things about expect, mentioned on BSD Now in a previous episode. Expect checks any command for a, quote, expected result, unquote, to be used in shell scripts to make them the logic more useful. I'm trying to install the expect package on FreeBSD 11.2 and run an example like user local bin expect underscore auto expect. The expect package installed fine, but it expected TCL. This was not a listed dependency, but was apparent when you looked at the example scripts." So he has an example for the expect auto expect.
So yeah, when it actually looks at the source code for the expect auto expect tool, it's a shell script that just invokes TCL shell, and then the rest of the code in the file is in TCL. So he says, doing a package search TCL gives many results. I did a package install TCL 87, but it has no man page. I did a package install TCL manual -2013-1001. You could not find the manual or man page. It does not have a ports maintainer, and I would consider becoming a doc contributor if I could find the documentation. I feel like Alice in FreeBSD Wonderland.
Yeah, if we have any suggestions to how to solve that. And as I mentioned, he continued his search while we recorded this, or before we could record it. So he has an update to his earlier question, and his update goes, "Update, tried some command on another server and it required TCL, the tool command language, as a dependency. I'm able to use expect without TCL."
Yeah, so I'm guessing on the other system, TCL 86 might have already been installed, and that's the only reason why it wasn't installed as part of expect. Hard to say. Anyway, glad you got it working. And let us, if anybody else runs into problems with this, let us know. And we can maybe chase up the ports people and see what it is we need to do to get it fixed.
Yeah. Or if you have any other news about TCL, we don't hear too much about that command language nowadays. If you're a ninja or guru in that, maybe you have a story about that for us or a blog post. Feedback at bsdnow.tv is your address. So thanks for that. Next up is David with a netgraph answer even. Oh, wow. David writes, "Hi guys, regarding the usage of netgraph with jails, there is a very nice video from Devin Teskey at MeetBSD 2016. Oh yes, I was there and remember it.
I should have remembered that and provided that link a couple weeks ago when we had the question come in. But, you know, I've been to so many conferences, I can't remember what was where.
And it shows that we have active listeners who are connecting the dots for us in case we don't do that.
Yes. And I think that video should be up in the papers.freebsd.org site as well.
Even better, that connects all the talks to each other in one place.
I have to look at the papers site a little bit more. It seems the menu has gotten a bit wonky after the last update to Hugo.
Yeah, a bit of facelifting there. But the talks are there, and it's just the presentation that needs a bit of polishing. So yeah, David, thank you for that. That completes this question and answer now. Very nice. And last this week is Mason with Beeps question mark. I see where this is going. This is our question we put out to people.
Yes, this is part of our ongoing quest to solve the beeping from your laptop.
Mm-hmm. So Mason writes, "I'm curious how beeping is handled in FreeBSD. On my ThinkPad T420 running FreeBSD 12, when I wake from sleep or when something beeps on the console or inside X, the beep is almost painfully loud. In X, the xset command seems not to work as advertised, and this probably wouldn't help with the ACPI events in any case. If I set current.vt.enable_bell equals 0, then that suppresses the bell in X, but not when I sleep or wake. The laptop, not Mason himself. Setting hw_syscons.bell seems not to be relevant when I'm running VT, but I don't want to suppress it, I just want to make it quieter. Thanks in advance." And yeah, that's our question here.
Yes, I'd be interested in the answer to this as well, because Lenovo X220 that I strapped to my exercise bike makes that terrible beep when you wake it up from sleep. So, you know, I open it up and it powers up, and then suddenly it's just like, beep! I'm like, Jesus Christ.
You would think that the engineers who built this didn't found this also a bit loud when they prototyped this machine?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's something kind of specific to FreeBSD or what. I've not tried it running anything other than FreeBSD on my laptop. But yes, so if you know how to make the beep less ear-splitting, that would be great. And please write into feedback@bsdnow.tv and tell us all about it. Because we have at least 6 or 8 people who've written in and are dying for the answer here.
Yeah.
I remember I think it was at EuroBSDcon, somebody actually commented about our question about it because I noted that at vBSDcon, with the one just after lunch, everybody came back to their laptops and opened them up, and you just hear beep, 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 beep. It's
You too.
If you're unsuspending your laptop during someone's talk, you really don't want a loud beep going off. That's why it's not the only reason, but my Lenovo, my X270, has the hardware mute basically almost always on because I generally don't ever want sound coming out of my laptop.
Yeah, it's not what you want to have.
That's not the right solution here. You do want the beep to work. You just want it to be pleasant and mild instead of sharp and stabby.
In the ears, yeah. Okay, yeah. With that note, we end this week's episode. Hope you liked it. Give us feedback on Twitter as well. We have a Twitter channel or Twitter account, of course, or directly via email to feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Yes, email is best because then we get to keep it and remember to look at it.
All right, see you next time.